Lovely Bones. I think it's called that. Um, we'll start with the blurb. Now a major film directed by Peter Jackson. My name was Salmon, like the fish. First name Susie. I was 14 when I was murdered on December 6th, 1973. My murderer was a man from our neighborhood. Watching from her place in heaven, Susie Salmon sees her suburban family devastated by her death, isolated even from one another as they try to teach each other to cope with their terrible loss, alone. Over the years, her friends and siblings grow up, fall in love, do all the things she never had the chance to do herself. But life is not quite finished with Susie yet. I sat down in the morning to read the first couple of pages. 5 hours later, I was still there, book in hand, transfixed. That's what some lady called Maggie O'Farrell said about this book in the Sunday Telegraph. This book will stay with you long after you finish. The last page. Daily Mail. Alright, here we go. The first page in this one, don't worry about that one, okay? This particular copy. I'm not going to show it to you, alright? But we'll get, one. We'll start here, alright? We'll just destroy the thing, too, as well. My name was Salmon, like the fish. First name, Susie. I was 14 when I was murdered on December 6th, 1973. In newspaper photos of missing girls from the 70s, most looked like me, white girls, with mousy brown hair. This was before kids of all races and genders started appearing on milk cartons or in the Daily Mail. It was still back when people believed things like that didn't happen. In my junior high yearbook, I had a quote from a Spanish poet my sister had turned me onto, Juan Ramon Jimenez. Sorry. sorry. I didn't mean. I've never read this before. Okay, I don't know what it was. Jimenez. I don't know how it's pronounced. Anyway. We get the. Alright, back to it. Alright, this time we get that. In my junior high yearbook, I had a quote from a Spanish poet my sister had turned me onto, Juan Ramon Jimenez. It went like this: if they give you ruled paper, write the other way. I chose it both because it expressed my contempt for the structure, surroundings, a la the classroom, and because, not being some dopey quote from a rock group, I thought it marked me as a literary. I was a member of the chess club and cam club and burned everything I tried to make in Mrs. Dolmanicho's home ec class. My favorite teacher was Mr. Bott, who taught biology and liked to animate the frogs and crawfish, and we animate the frogs and crawfish we had to dissect by making them dance in their waxed pans. Oh, yeah. She was this young lovely Bones is probably not a very good student. Didn't really think about the details. Just look at it. What? Anyway, sorry. Bzzzt. I wasn't killed by Mr. Bot, by the way. Don't think every person you're going to meet in here is suspect. That's the problem. You never know. Mr. Bot came to my memorial, as may I add, did almost the entire junior high school. I was never so popular and cried quite a bit. He had a sick kid. We all knew this, so when he laughed at his own jokes, which were rusty way before I had him, we laughed too, forcing it sometimes just to make him happy. His daughter died a year and a half after I did. She had leukemia, but I never saw her in my heaven. So, Mr. Bot had no problem just murdering students that, didn't listen good. That's fucking nasty. My murderer was a man from our neighborhood. My mother liked his border flowers, and my father talked to him once about fertilizer. My murderer believed in old-fashioned things like eggshells and coffee grounds, which he said his own mother had used. My father came home smiling, making jokes about how the man's garden might be beautiful, but it would stink to high heaven once a heat wave hit. But on December 6th, 1973, it was snowing, and I took a shortcut through the cornfield from the junior high. This is our ghost back from the junior high. It was dark out because it was dark. So, maybe not that much, But on December 6th, 1973, it was snowing and snow. But on December 6th, 1973, it was snowing and I took a shortcut through the cornfield back from the junior high. It was dark out because the days were shorter in winter. And I remember how the broken corn stalks made me walk more difficult. The snow was falling lightly like a flurry of small hands, and I was breathing through my nose until it was running so much that I had to open my mouth 6 feet from where Mr. Harvey stood. I struck my tongue out to taste a snowflake. Don't let me startle you, Mr. Harvey said. Of course, in a cornfield, in the dark, I was startled after I was dead. I thought about how there had been a light scent of cologne in the air, but that I had not been paying attention or thought it was coming from one of the houses up ahead, Mr. Harvey said. Fuck. Oh. You're the oldest Simon girl. You're the oldest Simon girl, right? Yes. How about your folks? Although the eldest of the family and good at although the eldest in my family and good at acing a science quiz, I had never felt comfortable with adults. Fine, I said. I was cold, but the natural authority of his age and the added fact that he was a neighbor and had talked to my father about fertilizer rooted me on the spot. Rooted me to the spot. What? That's fucking odd. I've been something back here, he said. Would you like to see, ghosts, the essential schizophrenia of the ghost. I've been something back here, he said. Would you like to see? I'm sort of cold, Mr. Harvey, I said. And my mom likes me home before dark. It's after dark, Susie, he said. I wish now that I had known this was weird. I had never told him my name. I guess I thought my father had told him one of the embarrassing anecdotes. He saw merely as losing testaments to his Children. No, stop. Some can't do like actual thought and content at the same time. My father and the kind of dad who kept was the kind of dad who kept a nude photo of you when you were 3 in the downstairs bathroom, the one that guests would use. He did this to my little sister, Lindsay. Thank God. At least I was spared that indignity. But he liked to tell a story about how once Lindsay was born, I was so jealous that one day, while he was on the phone in the other room, I moved down the couch. He could see me from where he stood and tried to pee on top of Lindsay in her carrier. This story humiliated me every time he told it to the pastor of our church, to our neighbor, Mrs. Steed, who was a therapist and whose take on it he wanted to hear, and to everyone who ever said, Susie has a lot of spunk. Spunk, my father would say. Let me tell you about spunk. And he would launch immediately into his Susie Pete on Lindsay story. But as it turned out, my father had not mentioned us to Mr. Harvey or told him the Susie Pete on Lindsay story. Mr. Can we go back to the Spanish quote? Ramon? Mr. Harvey would later say these words to my mother when he ran into her on the street. I heard about the horrible, horrible tragedy. What of your daughter's name again? Susie, my mother said, bracing up and under the weight of it. A weight that she naively hoped might lighten some day, knowing that it would only go on to hurt new and varied ways of the rest of her life. Mr. Harvey told her Mr. Harvey Mr. Harvey told her the usual. I hope the bastard. I'm sorry for your loss. I was in my heaven by that time, fitting my limbs together, and couldn't believe his audacity. The man has no shame, I said to Franny, my intake counselor. Exactly, she said, and made her point as simply as that. There wasn't a lot of bullshit in my heaven. Mr. Harvey said it would only take a minute. So I followed him a little farther into the cornfield, where fewer stalks were broken off because no one used it as a shortcut to the junior high. My mum had told my baby brother, Buckley, that the corn in the field was incredible. When asked why no one from the neighborhood ate it. The corn is for horses, not humans, she said. Not dogs, Buckley asked. No, my mother answered. Not dinosaurs, Buckley asked. And it went like that. I've made a little hiding place, said Mr. Harvey. He stopped and turned to me. I don't say anything, I said. Oh, wait. Someone turned to me. I don't say anything, I said. I was aware that Mr. Wait, oh fuck. I don't say anything, I said. I was aware that Mr. Harvey was looking at me strangely. I'd had older men look at me that way since I'd lost my baby fat, but they usually didn't lose their marbles over me when I was wearing my royal blue parka and yellow elephant bell bottoms. His glasses were small and round with gold frames, and his eyes looked out over them at me. You should be more observant, Susie, he said. I felt like observing my way out of there, but I didn't. Why didn't I? Franny said these questions were fruitless. You didn't, and that's that. Don't mull it over. It does no good. You're dead, and you have to accept it. Try again, Mr. Harvey said. And he squatted down and knocked against the ground. What's that? I asked. My ears were freezing. I wouldn't wear the multicolored cap with the pom-pom and jingle bells that my mother had made me one Christmas. I had shoved it in the pocket of my parka instead. I remember that I went over and stomped on the ground near him. It felt harder even than frozen earth, which was pretty hard. It's wood, Mr. Harvey said. It keeps the entrance from collapsing. Other than that, it's all made of earth. What is it? I asked. I was no longer cold or weirded out by the look he had given me. I was like I was in science class. I was curious. Come and see. It was awkward to get into. That much he admitted once we were both inside the hole. But I was so amazed by how he had made a chimney that would draw smoke out if he ever chose to build the fire. That the awkwardness of getting in and out of the hole wasn't even on my mind. You could add to that the escape wasn't a concept I had any real experience with. The worst I'd had to escape was Artie, a strange looking kid at school whose father was a mortician. He liked to pretend he was carrying a needle full of embalming fluid around with him. On his notebooks, he would draw needles spilling dark drips. "This is neato," I said to Mr. Harvey. "He could have been the Hunchback of Notre Dame." Whom he had read about in French class. I didn't care. I completely reverted. Was that guy? Electric sex pads, God damn, "This is neato," I said to Mr. Harvey. "He could have been the Hunchback of Notre Dame, whom we had read about in French class." I didn't care. I completely reverted. I was my brother Buckley on our day trip to the Museum of Natural History in New York, where he'd fallen in love with the huge skeletons on display. I hadn't used the word neato in public since elementary school. "Like taking candy from a baby," Franny said. "I can still see the hole like it was yesterday, and it was. Life is a perpetual yesterday for us. It was the size of a small room. The mud room in our house, say, where we kept our boots and slickers, and where Mum had managed to fit a washer and dryer, one on top of the other. I could almost stand up in it, but Mr. Harvey had no stoop. He'd created a bench along the sides of it. By the way, he'd dug it out. He immediately sat down. "Look around," he said. "Look around," he said. I started to stare at it in amazement. The dugout shelf above him, where he had placed matches, a row of batteries, and a battery-powered fluorescent lamp that cast the only light in the room, an eerie light that would make his features hard to see when he was on top of me. There was a mirror on the shelf and a razor shaving cream. I thought, that was odd. Wouldn't he do that at home? But I guess I figured that a man who had a perfectly good split level and then built an underground room only half a mile away had to be kind of Lulu. My father had a nice way of describing people like him. The man's character, that's all. So I guess I was thinking that Mr. Harvey was a character, and I liked the room. And it was warm, and I wanted to know how he had built it, what the mechanics of the thing were, and where he'd learned to do something like that. But by the time the Gilbert's dog found my elbow 3 days later and brought it home with a telling corn husk attached to it, Mr. Harvey had closed it up. I was in transit during this. I didn't get to see him sweat it out, remove the wood reinforcement, bag any evidence along with my body parts, except that elbow. By the time I popped up with enough wherewithal to look down at the goings-on on Earth, I was more concerned with my family than anything else. My mother sat on a hard chair by the front door, and her mouth open, her pale face paler than I had ever seen it, her blue eyes staring. My father was driven into motion. He wanted to know details and to comb the cornfield along with the cops. I still thank God for a small detective named Len Fenneman. He assigned 2 uniforms to take my dad into town and have him point out all the places I'd hung out with my friends. The uniforms kept my dad busy in one mall for the whole first day. No one had told Lindsay, who was 13 and would have been old enough, or Buckley, who was 4 and would, to be honest, never fully understand. Mr. Harvey asked me if I would like a refreshment. That was how he put it. I said I had to go home. "Be polite and have a Coke," he said. I'm sure the other kids would. What other kids? I built this for the kids in the neighborhood. I thought it could be some sort of clubhouse. I, I don't, I don't think I believed this even then. I thought he was lying, but I thought it was a pitiful lie. I imagined he was lonely. We had read about men like him in health class, men who never married and ate frozen meals every night and were so afraid of rejection that they didn't even own pets. I felt sorry for him. Okay, I said, I'll have a Coke. In a little while, he said, Aren't ye warm, Susie? Why don't you take off your parka? I did. After this, he said, You're very pretty, Susie. Thanks, I said, even though he gave me what my friend Clarissa and I had dubbed the skeebies. Do you have a boyfriend? No, Mr. Harvey, I said. I swallowed the rest of my Coke, which was a lot, and said, I got to Mr. I got to go. I gotta go, Mr. Harvey. This is a cool place, but I have to go. He stood up and did his hunch. Wait. Oh, he stood up and did it. Oh. He stood up and did his hunchback number by the sixth dug in. Steps that led to the world. I don't know why you think you're leaving. I talked so that I would not have to take in this knowledge. Mr. Harvey was no character. He made me feel skeevy and icky now that he was blocking the door. Mr. Harvey, I really have to get home. Take off your clothes. What? What? Take off your clothes, Mr. Harvey said. I want to check that you're still a virgin. Far out. I am, Mr. Harvey, I said. I want to make sure you... Wait. I want to make sure your parents will thank me. My parents? They only want good girls, he said. Mr. Harvey, I said. Please let me leave. You aren't leaving, Susie. You're mine now. Far out. This shit is fucking horrible. Fitness was another big thing back then. Aerobics was barely a word. Girls were supposed to be soft. And the only girls we suspected were butch, could climb the ropes at school. I fought hard. I fought as hard as I could not to let Mr. Harvey hurt me. But my hard as I could was not hard enough. Not even close. And I was soon lying on the ground, in the ground, with him, on top of me, panting and sweating, having lost his glasses in the struggle. I was so alive then, I thought. It was the worst thing in the world to be lying flat on my back with a sweating man on top of me, to be trapped inside the earth, and have no one know where I was. I thought of my mother. My mother would be checking the dial of the clock on her oven. It was a new oven, and she loved that it had a clock on it. I can time things to the minute. She told her own mother, a mother who couldn't care less about ovens. She would be worried, but more angry than worried at my lateness. As my father pulled into the garage, she would rush about fixing him a cocktail, a dry sherry, and put on an exasperated face. You know, junior high, she would say, maybe it's spring fling. Abigail, my father would say, how can it be spring fling when it's snowing? Having failed with this, my mother might rush Buckley into the room and say, play with your father, while she ducked into the kitchen and took a nip of sherry for herself. That's enough of that, okay? This is unpleasant, and everything